In the darkness of dusk, a creaking iron door opens at the back of a windowless warehouse. A man disappears among walls, stained with rust and old screams. Hanging upside down, a German shepherd struggles to breathe, blood dripping in steady drops. On the concrete floor, without a word, the man tests the ropes and leaves. On the other side of the warehouse, a baby crawls among bones and burned papers. The tiny hand touches the dog's snout. The body trembles. The warehouse falls silent. There, silence said more than any scream. Love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and never miss one. Thanks for following us. Now, back to our story. In the shadowy corners of Hope's Landing Animal Shelter, nestled on the outskirts of Millfield, Connecticut, the late afternoon sunlight filtered through. Dust-covered windows. The once bustling sanctuary had fallen into disrepair, its weathered wooden beams and cracked concrete floors telling stories of better days. Ethan Sullivan, a tall man with deep-set blue eyes and a perpetual furrow in his brow, moved slowly through the main hall, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Ethan had come to Hope's Landing 3 years ago, seeking solitude after leaving his veterinary practice in Boston. The small town of Millfield offered exactly what he needed: anonymity and distance from his past. He'd taken over the struggling shelter with minimal resources, but a determination to give the abandoned animals a fighting chance. Today, however, that determination was being tested. "Just hold on a little longer," Ethan whispered, kneeling beside a German shepherd lying motionless on a makeshift bed in the corner. The dog's once proud frame was now a canvas of suffering, its coat matted with dried blood and its limbs showing signs of prolonged restraint. Someone had done this deliberately, and the thought made Ethan's stomach turn. He had found the dog earlier that morning, tied to the shelter's front gate barely, conscious and whimpering softly. In all his years working with animals, Ethan had never seen such deliberate cruelty. The dog's eyes, clouded with pain, followed Ethan's movements, a flicker of awareness in their depths that tore at his heart. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor, and Ethan rose quickly. Through the grimy window, he recognized Sarah, Mitchell's old blue pickup truck. Sarah was the town's only veterinarian, a single mother with a reputation for working miracles with limited resources. Ethan had called her immediately after finding the dog. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked as she entered, her medical bag clutched tightly in one hand while the other balanced her 18-month-old son Matthew on her hip. The toddler's bright eyes contrasted sharply with the somber atmosphere of the shelter. "Worse than I described," Ethan replied, leading her to the corner. "I've tried to clean him up, but I'm afraid to move him too much." Sarah handed Matthew to Ethan, who awkwardly took the child and knelt beside the German shepherd. Her practiced hands moved gently over the dog's body, assessing the damage. The frown deepening on her face told Ethan everything he needed to know. "This is beyond what I can do here, Ethan," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He needs surgery, blood transfusions, specialized care. Even then," she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. "There has to be something," Ethan insisted, shifting Matthew to his other arm. The child was surprisingly calm, his wide eyes fixed on the injured dog. "We can't just let him—" Ethan stopped, unwilling to speak the inevitable outcome aloud. Sarah stood up and brushed the dust from her jeans. "I can give him something for the pain, make him comfortable. That's all I can offer right now." As she prepared the injection, Ethan felt a sudden squirm in his arms. Matthew was leaning forward, reaching toward the dog with determination. "Hold on there, little guy," Ethan said, tightening his grip, but Matthew was persistent. "It's okay," Sarah said, noticing her son's interest. "Just keep him from touching any wounds. Sometimes children sense things we don't." Reluctantly, Ethan lowered Matthew to the ground, but kept a firm hand on the back of his overalls. The toddler immediately crawled toward the German Shepherd, his movements slow but purposeful. Ethan tensed, ready to pull him back at the first sign of danger, but to his surprise, the dog's tail gave a weak thump against the floor. Matthew reached out his small hand and gently touched the dog's muzzle. The simple gesture seemed to bring a momentary peace to the animal's pained expression. For a brief instant, Ethan thought he saw something pass between them, a connection that defied explanation. "He's good with animals," Sarah commented, watching her son. "Always has been, ever since he could crawl." The moment was interrupted by the sound of the shelter's front door banging. "Open." "Sullivan, you in here?" a gruff voice called out. Ethan recognized the voice of Frank Davis, the mayor of Millfield, a man whose interest in the animal shelter had been conspicuously absent until recently. "In the back," he replied, lifting Matthew and returning him to Sarah. Frank appeared in the doorway, his imposing figure blocking the light. At 62, he still carried himself with the authority of his former career as a police officer. "Got your message about another abandonment," he said, eyeing the German Shepherd with a mix of pity and discomfort. "This is the third one this month." "Fourth," Ethan corrected, "and this one was deliberately hurt." Frank's expression hardened. "This town has enough problems without adding animal abuse to the list. The council meeting is next week, and I gotta tell you, Sullivan, the vote's not looking good for this place." Sarah stepped forward. "Frank, you can't possibly be thinking of closing the shelter now. Where would all these animals go?" "That's not my decision to make," Frank replied, though his averted gaze suggested otherwise. "The town's budget is stretched thin, and this property is valuable. Jenkins Development has made an offer that could solve a lot of Millfield's financial problems." Ethan felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. "So you'd rather sell out to some corporate developer than maintain the only animal shelter within 50 miles? Frank's face reddened. "What's your tone, Sullivan? I'm just the messenger. Here, the council votes next Thursday. If you want to save this place, you'd better have a damn good plan by then." With that, he turned and left, the door slamming behind him. Sarah placed a comforting hand on Ethan's arm. "We'll figure something out," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Ethan looked down at the German Shepherd, now resting more peacefully after Sarah's medication. "This dog deserves a chance, Sarah. They all do. I can't just let this place go without a fight." Matthew had settled on the floor beside the dog again, his small hand resting gently on its paw. The German Shepherd's eyes were closed, but its breathing seemed less labored, almost as if the child's presence brought some comfort. "What about you?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. "It's been 3 years since you came to Millfield, and I still know almost nothing about you, except that you're stubborn and you work too hard." Ethan managed a small smile. "Not much else to know." "I don't believe that," Sarah replied. "Nobody just abandons a successful veterinary practice in Boston to run a struggling animal shelter in a town like Millfield without a reason." "Everyone has their reasons," Ethan said quietly, turning away to check on the other animals. "Some are just better left in the past." As he moved through the shelter, filling water bowls and distributing food, Ethan felt Sarah's eyes on him. She was perceptive, too perceptive sometimes, and getting closer to questions he wasn't ready to answer. His past in Boston was a closed chapter, one filled with mistakes and regrets he'd rather forget. The setting sun cast long shadows through the shelter windows, creating a tapestry of light and darkness across the worn floor. Ethan paused at the German Shepherd's side, where Matthew still sat in silent companionship with the injured animal. "I should get him home for dinner," Sarah said, gathering her medical supplies. "I'll come back first thing tomorrow to check on—" She paused, realizing the dog had no name. "Max," Ethan said suddenly, the name coming to him unbidden. "His name is Max." Sarah nodded, lifting Matthew into her arms. The toddler protested, briefly, reaching back toward Max, but eventually settled against his mother's shoulder. "Try to get some rest, Ethan," Sarah advised, heading for the door. "You look exhausted." After they left, Ethan sank down beside Max, gently stroking the dog's head. "Just you and me now, buddy," he whispered. "But I promise you're not alone anymore." Outside, the first stars appeared in the twilight sky over Millfield, a town on the brink of change, unaware of the transformation that was about to unfold within the walls of Hope's Landing Animal Shelter. The next morning arrived with a gentle rain that tapped rhythmically against the shelter's metal roof. Ethan had spent the night on a cot beside Max, waking every hour to check on the German Shepherd. Despite Sarah's pain medication, the dog's condition remained precarious, his breathing shallow and labored. Ethan was changing Max's water bowl when he heard Sarah's truck pull up outside. Through the window, he watched as she lifted Matthew from his car seat, covering the child with her jacket to shield him from the rain as they hurried toward the shelter. "How is he?" Sarah asked, as she entered, setting Matthew down on a clean blanket she'd brought along. Ethan shook his head. "No change. I tried to get him to eat something, but he wouldn't touch it." Sarah knelt beside Max, her experienced hands moving gently over his body. The dog's eyes flickered open at her touch, a dim recognition in their depths. But they soon closed again. "His pulse is weaker than yesterday," she said, her voice tight with professional concern. "I brought more antibiotics, but without proper equipment." She didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew that Hope's Landing lacked the medical resources needed for cases like Max's. The nearest animal hospital was in Hartford, over an hour away, and Ethan doubted Max would survive the journey. "There has to be something else we can try," Ethan insisted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Maybe I could call Dr. Reynolds at Central Connecticut Veterinary. He owes me a favor." Sarah stood up, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's arm. "Ethan, I know this is hard, but we need to be realistic. Max has suffered severe trauma, and his body is shutting down. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is—" "Don't say it," Ethan interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. "I'm not giving up on him." The intensity of his reaction surprised them both, and Sarah studied him with curious eyes. "This isn't just about Max, is it?" Before Ethan could respond, a small movement caught their attention. Matthew had crawled from his blanket and was making his way determinedly toward Max. Ethan moved to intercept him, but Sarah held him back. "Wait," she whispered. "Just watch." Matthew reached Max's side and placed his tiny hand on the dog's muzzle, exactly as he had done the day before. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, to their astonishment, Max's tail gave a feeble thump against the floor. "That's unusual," Ethan said, watching as Matthew began to pat Max's head with gentle, rhythmic movements. Most dogs in his condition wouldn't tolerate being touched, especially by someone they don't know. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on her son. "Matthew has always had a way with animals. When he was just 6 months old, I found him in our backyard surrounded by butterflies. They were landing right on his hands like something from a fairy tale." As they watched, Matthew continued his gentle petting. Max's breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, began to slow and deepen. The dog's eyes opened clearer than before and fixed on the child with what almost looked like recognition. "Is he responding to Matthew?" Ethan asked incredulously. Sarah knelt beside her son, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "His vital signs are stabilizing. I can't explain it, but something's happening." Over the next hour, they observed a transformation that defied medical explanation. Max's breathing steadied, his pulse strengthened, and he even managed to lift his head slightly when Matthew offered him a small piece of chicken from the lunch Sarah had brought. "This is incredible," Sarah murmured, checking Max's wounds. "The inflammation is already reducing. It's as if..." "As if what?" Ethan prompted when she fell silent. Sarah shook her head. "It sounds crazy, but it's almost as if Matthew's touch is accelerating his healing process." "That's impossible," Ethan said, though the evidence before him suggested otherwise. "So is what we're seeing," Sarah replied. "I've been a vet for 12 years, and I've never witnessed anything like this." The shelter door opened, interrupting their conversation. Eleanor Peterson, an elderly woman who volunteered at the shelter twice a week, entered with a carrier containing a thin, sickly-looking tabby cat. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so glad you're here," she said, setting the carrier down. "I found this poor thing under my porch this morning. She's not eating, and her breathing sounds terrible." Ethan took the carrier and opened it carefully. The tabby inside was indeed in poor shape, her ribs visible beneath her dull coat and her eyes glazed with fever. "Bring her over here, Eleanor. Sarah can take a look." As Sarah examined the cat, Matthew toddled over, his interest piqued by the new arrival. Before either adult could stop him, he had reached into the carrier and placed his small hand on the cat's head. "Matthew, careful," Sarah warned, but her tone lacked conviction. She and Ethan exchanged a look, both wondering if they would witness another inexplicable recovery. Eleanor watched with confusion. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Ethan replied, uncertain how to explain what they had observed with Max. "Matthew just has a way with animals." Throughout the day, more people arrived at Hope's Landing, each bringing animals in various states of distress. Word had spread through Millfield's tight-knit community that Sarah Mitchell was at the shelter, offering free veterinary care. By mid-afternoon, the once quiet shelter was bustling with activity. Among the visitors was Jessica Torres, a local reporter for the Millfield Gazette, whose interest was piqued by the unusual gathering. "What's going on here, Ethan?" she asked, notepad in hand. "I've never seen so many people at the shelter at once." Ethan hesitated, unsure how to respond. The day's events had left him feeling off balance, caught between scientific skepticism and the undeniable evidence before his eyes. "Just a community outreach day," he said finally. "Sarah's offering free checkups for pets." Jessica's gaze drifted to where Matthew sat beside Max, whose improvement throughout the day had been nothing short of remarkable. The German Shepherd was now sitting up, accepting small amounts of food and water, his eyes clear and alert. "That's quite a recovery," she commented. "Wasn't that the same dog tied up outside yesterday? The one you thought wouldn't make it?" Before Ethan could respond, Eleanor joined the conversation. "It's the most extraordinary thing," she said excitedly. "That little boy touched my Misty, and within an hour she was eating and purring. I've never seen anything like it." Jessica's journalistic instincts immediately sharpened. "The boy, Sarah's son?" "Eleanor," Ethan interjected, "I'm sure Misty's improvement is due to Sarah's treatment." But Eleanor was not to be deterred. "No, it was the child, I'm telling you. It was like magic." Jessica's eyes lit up with interest. "Magic, huh? Sounds like there might be a story here." Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness. The last thing Sarah and Matthew needed was public attention and scrutiny. "There's no story, Jessica. Just a bunch of concerned citizens helping animals in need." Jessica smiled knowingly. "We'll see about that, Sullivan." She tucked her notepad into her pocket and moved towards Sarah and Matthew, her reporter's instincts clearly engaged. Ethan watched with growing unease. The day's events had been strange enough without adding media attention to the mix. He made his way to Sarah's side, arriving just as Jessica introduced herself. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm Jessica Torres. From the Gazette. I'd love to do a feature on your work here at the shelter, especially regarding these miraculous recoveries I'm hearing about." Sarah glanced at Ethan, a question in her eyes. "There's nothing miraculous about proper veterinary care, Ms. Torres," she replied carefully, "but we appreciate the interest in Hope's Landing." "And what about your son?" Jessica persisted, her gaze moving to Matthew, who was now curled up against Max's side, both of them dozing peacefully. "Several people have mentioned his special connection with the animals." "Matthew loves animals," Sarah said, her tone growing defensive. "All children do." Jessica nodded, though her expression remained skeptical. "Of course. Well, I'd still like to do that feature. The town council votes on the shelter's future next week, right? A positive story might help swing things in your favor." After Jessica left, Sarah turned to Ethan, her face troubled. "We need to be careful, Ethan. Matthew is just a child. I don't want him becoming some kind of local curiosity." Ethan nodded, understanding her concern. "We'll keep things quiet. But Sarah, what happened today with Max, with all of them? I can't explain it." Sarah looked over at her sleeping son, a mix of pride and worry in her eyes. "Neither can I. But whatever it is, it's helping these animals when nothing else could. For now, maybe that's enough." As evening approached, the shelter gradually emptied, leaving Ethan, Sarah, and Matthew alone with the animals. Max, who had been on the brink of departure just 24 hours earlier, was now standing on shaky legs, accepting gentle pets from Ethan. "I still can't believe it," Ethan murmured, watching as Max took a few tentative steps around the enclosure. "Yesterday, I thought we'd lose him for sure." Sarah sat on the floor beside him, Matthew sleeping in her lap. "Science can't explain everything, Ethan. Sometimes we just have to accept the mystery." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his thoughts turning to the past he'd left behind in Boston. "I used to believe that with enough knowledge and the right equipment, any animal could be saved. That belief cost me everything." Sarah studied his face in the fading light. "What happened in Boston, Ethan?" He met her gaze, feeling the weight of his secrets pressing down on him. "Another time, maybe," he said softly. "Right now, let's just focus on these animals, on the shelter, on whatever miracle we witnessed today." As they sat in companionable silence, watching Max's continuing recovery, neither of them noticed the pair of eyes observing them from outside the shelter window. Jessica Torres stood in the gathering darkness, her camera capturing the scene. Inside, a sleeping child, a healing dog, and two adults on the verge of discovering something that would change not only their lives, but the entire town of Millfield forever. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Hope's Landing to find a small crowd gathered outside the shelter's gates. Their murmured conversations fell silent as he approached, their expressions a mix of curiosity and expectation. Among them, he recognized faces from yesterday: Eleanor Peterson with her cat carrier, a local farmer with his limping border collie, and several others he'd never seen before. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, unlocking the gate with a growing sense of unease. Eleanor stepped forward, the Millfield Gazette clutched in her hand. "We read about the Miracle Boy," she said, extending the newspaper toward him. "We've brought more animals that need help." Ethan took the paper, his stomach sinking as he read the headline, "Miracle at Millfield Shelter. Local child's touch brings healing to wounded animals." The article, penned by Jessica Torres, detailed yesterday's events with dramatic flair, focusing particularly on Matthew's interactions with the animals and their subsequent recoveries. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Ethan muttered, folding the paper and shoving it into his back pocket. He addressed the crowd with a firm voice. Folks, I appreciate your interest, but the shelter isn't equipped for this many visitors at once. Dr. Mitchell will be here later and she can examine your animals then, but... Is it true? Interrupted a woman Ethan didn't recognize. Can her little boy really heal animals with his touch? Before Ethan could respond, the sound of Sarah's truck approaching drew everyone's attention. She parked and stepped out, her expression changing from surprise to concern as she took in the scene before her. Matthew was in her arms, his head resting on her shoulder as he blinked sleepily at the gathering. "Ethan?" Sarah called, making her way through the crowd. "What's happening?" He handed her the newspaper without a word. As she read, her face paled, and she instinctively tightened her hold on Matthew. This can't be happening. "Dr. Mitchell," called Eleanor, "we've brought more animals that need your son's special gift." Sarah looked at Ethan, panic evident in her eyes. "I need to get Matthew out of here," she whispered. Ethan nodded and turned to address the crowd. "Everyone, please listen. The shelter is closed for today. Dr. Mitchell and I appreciate your concern for your animals, but we need to manage this situation properly. Please visit her clinic during regular hours if your pets need medical attention." Amidst the disappointed murmurs, Ethan guided Sarah and Matthew back to her truck. "Take him home," he advised. "I'll deal with this and come by later." Sarah hesitated. "What about Max?" "I'll take care of him," Ethan assured her. "He's doing remarkably well this morning. Just focus on keeping Matthew away from all this attention for now." After Sarah drove away, Ethan spent the next hour politely but firmly turning people away from the shelter. By mid-morning, the crowd had dispersed, leaving only the animals that had been at Hope's Landing before the article was published. Ethan was checking on Max when he heard a car pull up outside. Through the window, he recognized Mayor Frank Davis's black SUV. Frank entered the shelter with Jessica Torres at his side, both of them surveying the space with newfound interest. "Quite an article you've got in today's paper, Ms. Torres," Ethan said coolly, "though you might have consulted us before running it." Jessica seemed unfazed by his criticism. "It's already the most read story on our website. People are fascinated by what's happening here." Frank cleared his throat. "That's partly why I'm here, Sullivan. The town council wants to postpone next week's vote on the shelter in light of recent developments." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean in light of the publicity?" "Call it what you want," Frank replied with a shrug. "The fact is, Jenkins Development isn't thrilled about the potential PR nightmare of shutting down a shelter that's suddenly become famous for miracle healings." "They're not miracle healings," Ethan insisted. "They're just coincidences." Jessica snorted. "Coincidences? I saw that German Shepherd yesterday, Sullivan. It was at death's door. Today it looks like it could win a dog show. That's not a coincidence." As if on cue, Max trotted into view, his tail wagging and his eyes bright. Seeing Ethan, he approached and nuzzled his hand affectionately. Frank stared at the dog in astonishment. "That's the same animal? The one Sarah said wouldn't make it?" Ethan nodded reluctantly. "Yes, but..." "My readers would love a follow-up story," Jessica interrupted, her phone already out to take pictures. "Maybe an exclusive interview with Dr. Mitchell about her son's gift?" "Absolutely not," Ethan said firmly. "Sarah and Matthew are off limits. They're not some sideshow attraction for your newspaper." Frank held up his hands placatingly. "No one's suggesting that, Sullivan. But you have to admit this changes things for the shelter. The council is considering a temporary reprieve while we assess the situation." "A reprieve isn't enough," Ethan argued. "Hope's Landing needs permanent status and proper funding, not just a stay of execution because of some media interest that will fade as soon as the next story comes along." Frank's expression hardened. "Don't push your luck, Sullivan. A month ago, this place was as good as gone. Now you've got a fighting chance." I'd be grateful if I were you. After they left, Ethan sat on the floor beside Max, scratching behind. The German shepherd's ears. What do you think of all this, buddy? He asked softly. One minute we're on the verge of losing everything, and the next, we're the talk of the town because of a toddler with magic hands. Max responded by resting his head on Ethan's knee, his eyes conveying a loyalty that had developed with surprising speed. It was hard to believe that this was the same dog that had been clinging to life just 2 days ago. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove to Sarah's small farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The modest white-clapboard house with its wraparound porch and flower garden seemed untouched by the morning's events, a peaceful haven amidst the growing chaos. Sarah answered the door with Matthew on her hip, her face relaxing slightly when she saw Ethan. "Come in," she said, leading him to a sun-filled kitchen where the remnants of lunch were still on the table. "Matthew's been asking about Max all day." "Max is doing great," Ethan assured the child, who responded with a delighted giggle. "In fact, he's better than great. It's like he was never injured at all." Sarah set Matthew in his playpen in the adjoining living room and returned to the kitchen, pouring coffee for both of them. "I've had 17 phone calls today," she said, her voice low. "People from as far as Hartford asking if they can bring their sick pets to meet Matthew. A reporter from the Connecticut Tribune left 3 messages. This is getting out of hand." Ethan took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. Frank Davis came by the shelter. The town council is postponing the vote on closing Hope's Landing. Apparently, Jenkins Development doesn't want the bad publicity of shutting down the miracle shelter. "At least some good is coming from this madness," Sarah sighed. "But what about Matthew? He's just a baby. I don't want him exploited or turned into some kind of sideshow attraction." "We won't let that happen," Ethan promised. "But Sarah, we need to talk about what's really going on. What we've seen these past 2 days, it defies explanation." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to where Matthew played contentedly with his toys. "I've been a scientist my whole life, Ethan. I believe in what I can observe, measure, and explain. But this..." She shook her head. "I can't explain it, but I can't deny it either." "Has he always been like this?" Ethan asked gently. "There have been incidents," Sarah admitted. "A bird with a broken wing that flew away after Matthew held it. Our neighbor's ancient cat that could barely walk, suddenly jumping fences after Matthew spent an afternoon petting it. I always found rational explanations. The bird wasn't as injured as we thought. The cat was having a good day. But now, with what's happening at the shelter..." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, Sarah spotted a van with the logo of a regional news station. "Oh no," she breathed. "They found us." Ethan stood up, his protective instincts kicking in. "I'll handle this. You stay inside with Matthew." Outside, a reporter and cameraman were already setting up equipment. "Dr. Mitchell," the reporter called when she saw Ethan emerge from the house. "We'd like to speak with you about your son's remarkable abilities." "Dr. Mitchell isn't available for comment," Ethan stated firmly, "and I'd appreciate it if you respected her privacy and her son's." The reporter persisted. "The public has a right to know about something this extraordinary. Is it true that your shelter was about to be closed down before these miracle healings began?" "There are no miracle healings," Ethan insisted. "Just good veterinary care and a lot of community support. Now please leave before I call the sheriff." By the time Ethan returned inside, Sarah had gathered Matthew in her arms, her expression resolute. "We can't stay here, Ethan. Not with reporters camping outside and people calling non-stop. Matthew needs normalcy, not this circus." "Where will you go?" Ethan asked, concern evident in his voice. My sister has a cabin up in Vermont. We could go there for a while until this blows over." She hesitated, then added, "What about the shelter? What about Max?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, weighing their options. "The shelter has a reprieve for now. And Max can come with me. I've been thinking about adopting him anyway." Sarah studied his face, her eyes searching. "You care about him a lot, don't you? More than just another rescue." "There's something about him," Ethan admitted. "It's like..." He trailed off, unsure how to express the strange connection he felt to the German Shepherd. "Like you were meant to find each other," Sarah finished for him. She set Matthew down and moved closer to Ethan. "There's something you're not telling me, something about your past in Boston. I think it's time, Ethan. If we're going to figure this out together, I need to know who you really are." Ethan felt the weight of his secrets pressing down on him. For 3 years, he'd kept his past, locked away, burying the pain and guilt that had driven him from Boston to this small town. But looking into Sarah's eyes, he knew the time for hiding was over. "You're right," he said softly. "It's time you knew the truth. But not here, not now. Tomorrow, at the shelter. I'll tell you everything then." Sarah nodded, accepting his terms. "Tomorrow, then. And Ethan, whatever it is, whatever happened in Boston, it won't change how I feel about you, about what you're doing for these animals." As Ethan prepared to leave, he knelt down to say goodbye to Matthew. The child reached out and placed his small hand on Ethan's cheek, a gesture so innocent yet so profound that Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "See you tomorrow, buddy," he whispered. "Take care of your mom, okay?" Driving back to the shelter, Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Tomorrow, he would have to confront the past he'd been running from for 3 years. Tomorrow, he would have to tell Sarah about Max, not just the Max who now waited for him at Hope's Landing, but the other Max, the one whose memory had haunted him all the way from Boston to the quiet streets of Millfield. As the shelter came into view, Ethan saw that another small crowd had gathered outside its gates. This time, however, they weren't carrying animal carriers or leashes. Instead, they held paintbrushes, ladders, and various tools. Among them, Ethan recognized members of the local high school's volunteer club, several of his regular shelter volunteers, and even some of the town council members. Eleanor Peterson waved as he approached. "Surprise," she called out. "We thought Hope's Landing could use a little sprucing up, given all the attention it's getting." Ethan stared in amazement at the scene before him. The community had rallied around the shelter in a way he'd never imagined possible. As he unlocked the gates and watched the volunteers stream in, eager to transform the once neglected space, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future, not just for Hope's Landing, but for himself as well. Inside, Max greeted him with enthusiastic barks and a wagging tail, as if he too sensed that change was in the air. Tomorrow would bring revelations, and possibly pain as Ethan finally confronted his past. But for tonight, surrounded by the warmth of community support and the loyal presence of a dog who should not have survived, Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, second chances were possible after all. Dawn broke over Hope's Landing with a gentle persistence, bathing the shelter in soft golden light. Ethan had spent the night there, sleeping fitfully on his office cot, his dreams haunted by fragments of a past he'd tried so hard to forget. Max lay beside the cot, his steady breathing a comforting counterpoint to Ethan's restless night. The volunteers had worked late into the evening, transforming the shelter with fresh paint, repaired kennels, and new bedding. The difference was striking. Hope's Landing looked alive again, a testament to what community support could accomplish in just one day. But Ethan's thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on the conversation that lay ahead when Sarah arrived. He was feeding the animals when he heard her car pull up outside. Through the window, he watched as she lifted Matthew from his car seat, the child's face lighting up at the sight of the shelter. Whatever concerns Sarah had about the media attention, Matthew seemed blissfully unaware, his innocence a stark contrast to the complexity swirling around him. "Wow," Sarah said as she entered, taking in the renovated space. "I hardly recognize the place." "The volunteers worked miracles," Ethan replied, the word miracles hanging awkwardly between them, a reminder of why they were really here. Matthew squirmed in Sarah's arms, reaching toward the back of the shelter, where Max was housed. "Mama!" he exclaimed, one of his few clear words. "I think he's saying Max," Sarah said with a small smile. "He's been talking about him all morning." They moved to Ethan's small office at the back of the shelter, a cramped space that had been spared the volunteers' makeover. Sarah set Matthew on the floor, where he immediately began playing with a stuffed dog toy that Ethan kept for the occasional visiting child. "So," Sarah said, settling into the worn chair across from Ethan's desk. "Boston." Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Yes, Boston. I was a veterinary surgeon at Riverdale Animal Hospital, one of the most advanced veterinary facilities in New England. I had everything I thought I wanted. A successful career, recognition in my field, financial security." "What changed?" Sarah asked softly. Ethan's gaze drifted to a photograph on his desk, the only personal item in the sparse office. It showed a younger version of himself with a German shepherd that bore a striking resemblance to Max. "His name was Max, too," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was my dog, my best friend for 8 years. He'd been with me through veterinary school, through my residency, through every step of building my career." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. "The resemblance to our Max, it's remarkable." "It's more than remarkable," Ethan replied. "It's almost impossible. Same markings, same eyes, even the same white patch on his chest." He paused, gathering himself. 3 years ago, Max developed osteosarcoma, bone cancer. It's aggressive in dogs, especially German shepherds. As a veterinary surgeon, I had access to treatments most pet owners couldn't afford or even know about. Experimental therapies, specialized surgeries. I tried everything. "Oh, Ethan," Sarah murmured, her eyes filling with sympathy. "The last surgery was my idea," Ethan continued, his voice tight with remembered pain. "A risky procedure that had shown promise in early trials. I convinced the hospital board to let me perform it, even though several colleagues advised against it. I was so certain I could save him." He fell silent, the weight of memory pressing down on him. Outside the office, they could hear Max, the new Max, padding around the shelter, his nails clicking gently on the concrete floor. "The surgery failed," Ethan finally said. "Max's heart couldn't handle the anesthesia. He didn't wake up, and the worst part, a review board later determined that the procedure was unnecessary, that it offered no real hope. I let my emotions override my medical judgment, and it cost my best friend his life." Sarah reached across the desk and took his hand. "You were trying to save him. Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone had the means to do what I did," Ethan countered. After I lost him, I couldn't practice anymore. Every time I looked at an operating table, I saw him. Every German shepherd that came into the hospital reminded me of my failure. So I left. I drove until I found Millfield, a place where nobody knew me or my mistakes, where I could try to make amends by saving the animals nobody else wanted. Matthew had abandoned his toy and was now trying to open the office door, eager to find the real Max. Sarah lifted him into her lap, but his squirming continued. "And then this Max showed up," Sarah said, connecting the pieces, "looking exactly like your Max at death's door, needing a miracle to survive." Ethan nodded. When I first saw him tied to the gate, I thought I was hallucinating. The resemblance is... it defies explanation. And then Matthew touched him, and he began to heal in ways that should have been impossible. Matthew had managed to wriggle free from Sarah's grasp and was now pounding on the door with his small fists. Ma, he insisted. I think we should let him see Max, Sarah suggested gently. Whatever's happening here, Matthew seems to be at the center of it. They followed Matthew as he toddled determinedly through the shelter, making a beeline for Max's enclosure. The German shepherd was waiting there, his tail wagging at the sight of the child. When Matthew reached through the gate to touch him, Max nuzzled his hand affectionately. They have a connection, Sarah observed. Something beyond anything I can explain with medicine or science. Do you believe in second chances? Ethan asked suddenly, his eyes fixed on the interaction between child and dog. Not just new opportunities, but true second chances. The universe giving you another shot at something you lost? Before Sarah could answer, the shelter door opened and Mayor Frank Davis entered, accompanied by a well-dressed stranger. Sullivan, Dr. Mitchell, Frank greeted them, his tone unusually cordial. I'd like you to meet Richard Jenkins of Jenkins Development. He's been following the unusual events here with great interest. Richard Jenkins was tall and imposing, his tailored suit and confident smile marking him as someone accustomed to getting his way. Dr. Sullivan, Dr. Mitchell, he said, extending his hand, and this must be the remarkable young man I've been hearing about. Sarah instinctively stepped in front of Matthew, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on anyone present. My son is not part of any public spectacle, Mr. Jenkins. Jenkins held up his hands placatingly. Of course not, Dr. Mitchell. I completely understand your concern, but what's happening here is extraordinary. The entire state is talking about it. What do you want, Jenkins? Ethan asked bluntly. A week ago, you were planning to bulldoze this place for luxury condominiums. Jenkins smiled, unperturbed by Ethan's hostility. Plans change, Dr. Sullivan. The publicity surrounding your shelter has created a unique opportunity. I'm prepared to withdraw my development proposal and instead offer a substantial donation to renovate Hope's Landing into a state-of-the-art animal care facility. Ethan and Sarah exchanged surprised glances. What's the catch? Ethan asked suspiciously. No catch, Jenkins replied smoothly. Just a partnership. The Jenkins Foundation for Animal Healing. With your expertise, Dr. Mitchell's veterinary knowledge, and your son's special abilities, we could create something truly revolutionary, a place where animals from all over the country could come for healing. You want to exploit my child, Sarah said flatly. Turn him into some kind of sideshow attraction. Jenkins frowned. That's not at all what I'm proposing. This would be a legitimate research and treatment facility. Your son would be properly compensated, of course, as would both of you as co-directors. Matthew is 18 months old, Sarah retorted. He's not for sale at any price. Frank cleared his throat uncomfortably. The proposal has merit, Sarah. The economic impact on Millfield would be substantial. Jobs, tourism, tax revenue. And the animals would benefit too. I thought the council vote was postponed, Ethan said, struggling to keep his tone level. It was, Frank acknowledged, but Jenkins's new proposal changes things. The council meets tomorrow to consider it. I thought you should hear it directly from him first. After they left, Ethan and Sarah stood in stunned silence, watching as Matthew continued to play with Max, oblivious to the adult concerns swirling around him. They want to turn him into a commodity, Sarah said finally, her voice breaking. My baby. Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. We won't let that happen. Whatever's going on here, whatever Matthew can do, it's not something to be exploited or commercialized. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes searching his. What if it is a second chance, Ethan? Not just for Max or for the shelter, but for all of us. What if Matthew's gift is meant to heal more than just animals? The question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither could fully articulate. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles signaled the arrival of more visitors, more people drawn to the story of the miracle child and the animals he could heal. "We need to protect him," Ethan said firmly, "whatever it takes." Sarah nodded, her resolve matching his. Whatever it takes. As they prepared to face the growing crowd outside, neither noticed that Max had moved to stand protectively beside Matthew, his posture alert and watchful. In the German shepherd's eyes, there was an awareness that seemed to transcend his canine nature, a recognition of the forces gathering around them and the challenges that lay ahead. The next morning arrived with a sense of inevitability, like the final act of a play whose outcome had been determined long ago. Ethan woke early, his decision made in the quiet hours of the night. He found Max waiting by the shelter door, as if the German shepherd somehow understood the importance of the day ahead. "Ready to face the music, buddy?" Ethan asked, scratching behind Max's ears. The dog responded with a soft whine and a gentle nudge against Ethan's hand. The town council meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock at Millfield's modest town hall. By 9, the parking lot was already filled to capacity, with news vans from stations as far away as New York lining the street. Ethan deliberately arrived late, slipping in through a side entrance to avoid the reporters who had besieged the main doors. Inside the council chamber, every seat was taken, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. At the front, Mayor Frank Davis sat with the 6 council members, their expressions ranging from excitement to skepticism. Richard Jenkins occupied a seat in the front row, his confident posture suggesting a man who rarely faced defeat. Ethan scanned the room for Sarah but couldn't spot her among the crowd. She had been ambivalent about attending when they'd spoken the previous evening, torn between defending her son's privacy and allowing others to decide his fate in her absence. First item on today's agenda, Frank announced, bringing the meeting to order, the proposal regarding Hope's Landing Animal Shelter and the Jenkins Foundation for Animal Healing. Mr. Jenkins, would you like to present your proposal? Jenkins rose smoothly, adjusting his tie as he moved to the podium. Thank you, Mayor Davis, council members, citizens of Millfield. We stand at the threshold of an extraordinary opportunity. As Jenkins outlined his vision, a world-class facility that would put Millfield on the map, bringing jobs, tourists, and prestige to the small town, Ethan observed the council members' reactions. Most were nodding appreciatively, clearly swayed by the economic arguments and the polished presentation. The Jenkins Foundation is prepared to commit $5 million to this project, Jenkins concluded, his announcement drawing gasps from the audience. All we ask in return is the town's support and the participation of those central to the shelter's recent miraculous events. Frank thanked Jenkins and then scanned the room. Dr. Sullivan, I believe you wanted to address the council. Ethan made his way to the podium, acutely aware of the expectant faces turned toward him. He had rehearsed this speech countless times during the night, but now, facing the reality of what he was about to do, the words seemed inadequate. 3 years ago, he began, his voice steadier than he expected. I made a mistake that cost me everything I valued. I was a veterinary surgeon in Boston, respected in my field, dedicated to saving animals' lives. But when my own dog Max developed cancer, I let my emotions override my professional judgment. I performed a risky experimental procedure that ultimately led to his passing. A murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the speech they had anticipated. I came to Millfield seeking anonymity, a place to hide from my failure. Hope's Landing became my redemption project, a way to atone for the life I couldn't save by saving others. And then, 3 days ago, a German Shepherd was abandoned at our gate. A dog so identical to my Max that at first I thought I was hallucinating. Ethan paused, gathering his courage for what came next. That same day, Dr. Sarah Mitchell brought her son Matthew to the shelter. What happened next defies medical explanation. Matthew touched the dog, this new Max, and something extraordinary occurred. An animal on the brink of departure began to heal. Since then, we've witnessed similar events with other animals at the shelter. He looked directly at Jenkins now. Mr. Jenkins sees an opportunity for profit and prestige. He envisions a facility where Matthew's gift, whatever it may be, can be harnessed and commercialized, and I understand the appeal of his proposal. The shelter needs funding, the town needs economic development, and the animals need care. But there's something Mr. Jenkins doesn't understand, something I've only begun to grasp myself. The council chamber door opened, and Sarah entered with Matthew in her arms. All eyes turned to watch as she made her way down the aisle, Max trotting faithfully at her side. The German Shepherd's transformation was so complete that several people gasped, recognizing him from the newspaper photographs that had shown him near death just days earlier. What's happening at Hope's Landing isn't about miracle cures or economic opportunities, Ethan continued as Sarah took a seat in the front row. It's about connection, the purest form of healing that comes when we open ourselves to the possibility that there are forces in this world beyond our understanding. Matthew's gift isn't something to be packaged or sold. It's a reminder of what we all possess but have forgotten, the capacity to heal through compassion, through love, through the simple act of being present with another living being in their suffering. Jenkins rose from his seat, his expression darkening. This is all very poetic, Dr. Sullivan, but it doesn't address the practical realities. The shelter needs funding to survive, and my proposal offers that and more. You're right about one thing, Ethan conceded. Hope's Landing does need funding. That's why I'm announcing today that I'm donating my entire inheritance from my grandfather's estate, $3 million, to establish the Hope's Landing Foundation. The shelter will remain independent, dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating animals in need without exploiting anyone or anything in the process. A stunned silence fell over the chamber, broken only by Matthew's delighted giggle as Max nuzzled his hand. The council members exchanged bewildered glances, clearly unprepared for this development. I wasn't aware you had such resources at your disposal, Dr. Sullivan, Frank said finally. Few people were, Ethan replied. When I left Boston, I left everything behind, including access to the trust fund my grandfather established for me. I wanted to succeed or fail on my own merits, but some things are more important than pride. The animals at Hope's Landing deserve a secure future, and Matthew deserves a childhood free from exploitation. Jenkins's face had flushed red with anger. This is absurd. You can't possibly match the resources or expertise my foundation would bring to this project. Perhaps not, Sarah said, rising. To stand beside Ethan at the podium, Matthew balanced on her hip. But we offer something your proposal doesn't. Respect for the mystery of what's happening and a commitment to protecting the innocence of a child who shouldn't be turned into a commodity. Matthew reached out toward Max, who had remained dutifully at Sarah's side. The dog rose on his hind legs, placing his front paws on Sarah's knees to get closer to the child. As Matthew's small hand touched Max's head, a collective sigh seemed to ripple through the chamber, not because anything visibly miraculous occurred, but because the simple connection between child and animal spoke to something profound within each witness. I move that we accept Dr. Sullivan's proposal, said Councilwoman Eleanor Peterson, her voice breaking the spell. and that we officially designate Hope's Landing as a protected historical site, ensuring its future as an animal sanctuary regardless of any changes in town leadership. The vote was unanimous, even Mayor Frank Davis adding his support after a moment's hesitation. Jenkins stormed from the chamber, his carefully crafted plans in tatters, while reporters pressed forward, eager for statements and photographs. Ethan and Sarah navigated through the crowd, deflecting questions with polite but firm refusals. Outside, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the town square, where a small group of Hope's Landing volunteers waited with supportive smiles and quiet congratulations. "You never mentioned a $3 million inheritance," Sarah said when they finally had a moment alone, walking toward her truck with Matthew dozing on her shoulder and Max padding alongside. Ethan shrugged, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It never seemed relevant before. After what happened in Boston, I couldn't touch the money. It felt tainted somehow, like accepting it would mean admitting that my career, my life there, had been worthwhile despite my failure." "And now?" Sarah asked, studying his face in the golden afternoon light. "Now I understand that redemption isn't about punishing yourself forever. It's about finding a way to make something good come from something painful." He looked down at Max, who gazed back with an understanding that seemed impossible for a dog who'd known him only a few days. "Besides, I think my grandfather would approve of how the money's being used." They reached Sarah's truck, and Ethan helped her secure a sleepy Matthew in his car seat. "What happens now?" she asked as she closed the door, keeping her voice low to avoid waking her son. "With the shelter, with Matthew's gift, with us?" Ethan considered the question, feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. "The shelter will continue its work, but better funded and better equipped. As for Matthew's gift, I think that's something for him to explore as he grows older, on his own terms, without pressure or exploitation." "And us?" Sarah pressed, a hint of vulnerability in her voice that he'd never heard before. Ethan reached out and took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing. "I'd like to find out if you would, one day at a time, no expectations, just possibility." Sarah's smile was answer enough. As they stood there, hands linked in the fading afternoon light, Max sat patiently beside them, his presence a silent affirmation of connections that transcended understanding. In the weeks that followed, Hope's Landing underwent a transformation. New facilities were built, staff was hired, and the shelter's reputation grew. Animals continued to heal under Matthew's touch, though Sarah was careful to limit these interactions, protecting her son's childhood, even as she acknowledged the gift he possessed. Researchers came, of course, scientists eager to document and explain what they witnessed. Some spoke of heightened electromagnetic fields, others of psychosomatic responses triggered by the innocence of a child's touch. None could fully explain the healing they observed, and eventually most accepted that some mysteries were meant to remain just that, mysteries. Ethan adopted Max officially, though everyone who knew them understood that the relationship went far deeper than ownership. The German Shepherd became a fixture at the shelter, greeting visitors with dignified warmth and watching over the other animals with an almost human comprehension. One evening, as autumn gave way to winter, Ethan sat on the porch of Sarah's farmhouse, Max at his feet and Sarah beside him, watching as the first snowflakes of the season drifted lazily from a darkening sky. Through the window, they could see Matthew sleeping peacefully in his playpen, one small hand clutching the stuffed dog toy Ethan had given him. "Do you ever wonder," Sarah asked softly, "if Max, your first Max, somehow found his way back to you?" Ethan considered the question, watching as the German Shepherd at his feet lifted his head, ears perked as if listening to their conversation. "I don't know," he admitted. Science would say it's impossible, that I just projected my grief onto a dog that happened to look like him. But after everything we've seen with Matthew, some things defy scientific explanation. Sarah finished for him, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. Some connections transcend what we can understand or measure. Max rose and padded to the door, his posture suggesting he'd heard something they couldn't. A moment later, Matthew's sleepy cry drifted from inside. The German shepherd looked back at them expectantly, as if to say, "He needs us." Together, they rose and moved toward the warmth of the house, toward the child whose innocent touch had healed not just wounded animals, but wounded hearts as well. As they crossed the threshold, Ethan paused, looking back at the night sky where stars were beginning to appear between the snow clouds. "Thank you," he whispered, though to whom or what he couldn't have said exactly. Perhaps to the universe that had granted him an impossible second chance, or to the mysterious forces that had brought Matthew, Sarah, and a remarkable German shepherd into his life. Or perhaps simply to the capacity for healing that existed in all living things, waiting only for the right touch to awaken it. Max nudged his hand gently, drawing him back to the present moment, to the life that awaited him inside. With a smile, Ethan closed the door on the gathering night, stepping into the light of a future he could never have imagined 3 days ago. A future built on compassion, connection, and the quiet miracle of beginning again. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan and Sarah's journey through healing and second chances has touched your heart. For those seeking more emotionally resonant stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this tale of connection and redemption moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexities and the power of unexpected bonds. Join us in the comments section below to share your thoughts on Hope's Landing and the mysterious healing power of compassion. We look forward to hearing from you and continuing this journey together.